Hello, my name is William Mwembe, welcoming you to this week's edition of the program Business Time. This is a magazine program where we bring you major business and economic news stories making headlines in the country. And in the program today, we look at prospects towards rejuvenating the country's energy sector as power oils continue to cripple the country's economy, with activities shrinking by day.
The main issue that we have now, which is giving us sleepless nights, is the issue of Kapichira.
And also in the program, what needs to be done to awaken the deemed sleeping giant, the agriculture sector in the country? We speak to one of the country's investors in the agriculture sector, Pixis Agriculture Limited, to find out what the company is doing towards reactivating what is deemed the lost growth.
A lot more communication, a lot more collaboration between government, private sectors, and even the Chamber of Commerce.
We have these and other stories. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome. This is Business Time. In our main story in the program today, for quite some time, Malawi has been grappling with energy woes as power outages seem to be order of the day. This is to an extent affecting economic activities and prospects for growth. As we speak, energy generation company of Malawi, Ejenco, is only able to generate as high as 200 megawatts against an elevated demand of electricity. This comes as Kapchira hydropower plant was affected by the cyclone Anna, and 18 billion kwacha is needed to revamp the plant. If it is revamped, then at least for an extent, Malawi would ease the pressure that it has been facing. But 3 months down the line, there seems to be no work done on the ground in as far as rejuvenating the Kapchira power plant is concerned. What is the status of the situation? Our journalist Justin Kweu has the whole story in this report.
In February this year, Malawi was faced with Tropical Storm Anna, which destroyed a lot of infrastructure, among them the Kapchira hydropower plant, which by then was providing 130 megawatts to the country at its installed capacity. Exactly 3 months down the line, state-run electricity generation company Ejenco has only just been given a nod by the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Authority to have a restricted tender as part of the process of finding a contractor. But commentators feel the rehabilitation work is not being treated with urgency. Addressing journalists over the weekend, when Minister of Energy Ibrahim Matola toured Tezani and Nkula hydropower stations, Ejenco Chief Executive Officer William Liabunya could however not clearly tell when the power plant will be back in operation. He hinted that funding for the rehabilitation works, which would either come from insurers or developing partners, was yet to be accessed.
The main issue that we have now, which is giving us sleepless nights, is the issue of Kapichira. You are all aware that we lost 130 megawatts and we are working around the clock to see that we restore Kapichira. And the hope that we have is that we'll have Kapichira back when all things are put together. I'm pleased to inform you that now procurement has started because the PPD has approved our proposal for restricted tender. So we expect by the end of May, we should be able to identify a contractor who can start the work. There is an issue of financing that we believe within the next month, it should be sorted out. So we are quite optimistic that by the end of May, we should have a contractor and we should be able to move on the ground come June, anytime thereabouts. The rains are over, yes, but I'm also very pleased to say that we have the highest level of water in the Lake Malawi this year than ever in the past 10 years. So the water that is there is very, very available and very adequate that we can be generating full capacity of the available generation machines and be able to supply even the dry season. That we are confident. And even if Kapichira was back in the dry season, we should be able to generate because we have adequate water this year.
In an interview, Matola could also not clearly spell out the deadline of the project.
The good thing is that the intake is still intact. What can be done or remobilization of the funds is what we have seen. On top of the intake, that's where needs the rehabilitation, but also removing of the the stones, big stones, and some logs. As you recall that on the 24th and 25th of January, we had Cyclone Anna, which followed also Cyclone Gombe. So many things or debris were carried into the intakes. So we need more resources and more activities in order to remove the debris and also the siltation. The siltation is indeed causing a lot of problems because the dam is getting dry so quickly. But we thank God on the other side, the positive one, that this year's rains are more than enough, which will carry us, and we are not going to experience the shortage or low levels of water because we had a lot of rains this year. When you talk about the rehabilitation of the Kapichira, I think the Kapichira will be another visit. However, that component has got its own resources, and also we had the budget that they were talking about 18 billion, and then it was reduced to 15 billion. However, let's talk when we are at Kapichira, but today I came to appreciate what is happening at Nkula and Tezani.
Ejenko feeds about 442 megawatts into the national grid with both hydropower and diesel generators, but the collapse of the Kapichira power station means the firm could be able to generate only 312 megawatts. Ejenko's generation capacity is at 200 megawatts, while IPPs are feeding about 75 megawatts to the power grid, which means the country's generation is below 300 megawatts.
Now, moving on with the program. The Malawi Confederation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, MCCCI, the umbrella body of private sector players in the country, recently elected Lekani Katandula as its new president. He is the managing director for Ilovo Sugar Malawi Limited. Our journalist Chimwemwe Mangazi caught up with Katandula to find out his aspirations, dreams and vision for the chamber and the private sector at large in the country, and he has since filed this report.
Katundula says currently there is a lot of uncertainty on incentives which frustrates the private sector. In the past year, the private sector has demonstrated willingness and ability to make significant investments in the country's key sectors, such as energy, witnessed by solar farms planted by private sector players.
If I look at the power sector as an example, we do have some regulations that say if you invest more than $30 million, then at the volition of a committee of people comprising people like the governor of the Reserve Bank, the MRA, and a few others, they could assess how much tax incentivization to give you, which could be variable depending on how they assess the entire project. Now, that's not a fantastic way of attracting investment. Investors, when they're coming in, they don't want that kind of uncertainty. They want certainty. It is a lot better to say, if you do 1, 2, 3, meet the following conditions, these are the incentives that you will access. It's a lot better for an investor to factor into his or her assessments before deciding to invest, as opposed to if you do 1, 2, 3, then we'll sit and discuss and see if we should give you the incentives or not. So let's clear out such uncertainties and be more direct in terms of available incentives so we can see more and more people investing.
On the business outlook for the remaining months of the year, he says it remains murky considering the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and increase in global fuel and fertilizer prices.
Sitting today, it looks quite challenging because the Ukraine war is still going on, and therefore the challenges of very expensive fuels and fertilizer, wheat, etc. are real possibilities. This could go on for a while. But on the other hand, we really don't know when that would end. Maybe there's an end to all of that soon and things will start easing. We've also seen the start of the tobacco season, albeit a slow start, but one would hope that now with the rains very much getting behind us, we'll see more sustained supplies of tobacco on the floors and a better realization of forex for both government and the private sector. And we've also seen recently that with rising COVID cases in China, the Chinese economy is locking up a little bit, which has reduced their demand for fuel and resulted in a small drop in international crude prices. And we've already seen our neighbor in Zambia reducing their petrol and diesel prices. So one hopes that if that is sustained, we could also see the same here, which would be the start of some good news. And we are aware that the Minister of Finance has been engaging with the IMF. If that turns out to be a successful mission, it could also mean that the forex we're getting from tobacco could be sustained, supplemented with some loans from IMF and others. And if that comes through, it could help ease the forex supply. So there are some factors that are negative, but some factors that can mitigate some of the negatives that could come up soon. We're seeing every now and again attempts at easing the power supply. I think in today's paper there is coverage of 29 megawatts from Tanzania 3 and 4 now being back. And we've seen the president going to Mozambique to negotiate interconnection deals that could see us get power back. And Genco is also talking of repairs to the Kapichira Dam, which hopefully will come through within this calendar year. And if these things come through, then we could have a better end to the year than we have had the first 4 months of the year. So I think it's a mixed outlook, but with the possibility of finishing strongly. So I think let's stay positive and find ways of winning despite the challenges we're facing, and definitely be on the lookout to take advantage of any opportunities that could come our way as some of the current challenges is.
Ministry of Trade and Industry spokesperson Maison Sogera says the government is always open to suggestions from the private sector. According to the Tax Incentives Handbook, specific customs and excise tax incentives in Malawi cover 10 sectors, including construction, energy, tourism, agriculture, transport, mining, education, health, manufacturing, and export processing.
Remember, this is a Business Time, a magazine program where we bring you major business and economic news stories making headlines in the country. We'll be right back, and when we get back, we look at strides towards commercialization of the agriculture sector, as the sector remains one of the key sectors for the Malawi economy. That's when we get back inside Business Time. Welcome back. This is Business Time on Times, and my name is William Kumwembe. Moving on with the program. Malawi is an agrarian economy, but the sector's inputs to the GDP seem to be dwindling by day. There's been concerns that if this is not addressed, the future looks mixed and murky. But what needs to be done? 2 things have been suggested. Number 1, commercialization of the agriculture sector. And number 2 is to ensure that there is diversified production. But concerns are, how could this be when 80% of the players in the agriculture sector seem to be subsistence farmers, most of whom do not have the desired capacity? We caught up with Ronald Ngwira, who is Pixus Malawi Limited Managing Director, one of the key investors in the agriculture sector, on his views on what Malawi could do to ensure that these smallholder farmers are elevated to contribute substantially to the growth of the agriculture sector.
Yes, Malawi is an agricultural-based economy. When we look at the land holding, only 1.8% of the land is actually being used for tobacco production. So it's a very small amount, even though it's unlocking 50-60% of the foreign exchange earnings. But it is a small portion of the land. Groundnuts, on the other hand, is about 3.5% of the agricultural land. So there's a lot of land out there for maize and for many other crops. So from a land perspective, it's not such a big issue. But how do we improve the productivity? How do we take the farmers from 1 ton to 2.5 tons to unlock the potential, give them the right varieties, get them to grow better groundnuts and more groundnuts on the same land? So it's really about addressing the productivity issues. There's a lot at stake, and our soil health in Malawi is a major challenge. So the pH of the soils is an issue. We do need to start putting agricultural lime back in the soils. The second issue is the organic matter. Most of our soils have very low organic matter, and that's because we've been farming them for many years without incorporating the organic matter back in. So because we use a hand hoe, and a farmer's favorite tool for land preparation is a box of matches. And we need to move away from that and start looking after our soils, because it's one of the biggest investments that we have is our soil health. So how do we improve on the soil health? And in a year like this where Russia and Ukraine are forcing the prices of fertilizer up, it doesn't help that our soils are tired. So we really need to start addressing the soil health and looking at the financing gaps for the farmers, because, for example, on groundnuts, a normal farmer gets 1 ton a hectare, but if you increase his seed rate from 60 kilos a hectare to about 110, and if they go to double row planting, throw in some inoculant and 2 bags of fertilizer, then you're moving from 1 ton to 2.5 tons. That requires about 120,000 kwacha, more inputs. Now, are the banks stepping up to finance the growers, whether it's groundnuts, whether it's soy or these other crops? How do we get the farmers having access to, 1, good quality inputs, 2, on time, at the right time, and number 3, who's going to meet the financing gap? Because private sector on their own has some issues, and the banks are also risk averse and scared. So how do we have that conversation with government, with the banks, and create a risk-sharing model that can unlock the potential of doubling our groundnut production in Malawi and doubling our soya production in Malawi on the same land, not asking for more land on the same land? Certain people mix up commercial agriculture with large-scale agriculture, and they can go together, but it's not necessarily the same. So smallholder farmers are very successful. And the IPS model on the tobacco side has taken the smallholder farmer from 700-800 kilos a hectare. Today they're sitting at 2.5 tons. And they can be considered as commercial farmers who are getting world standard yields and better quality. But it's taken some investment. Coming down to the 2063, it will take time. And a lot of policies need to be made a little bit more conducive to doing business. Specifically, how do we make sure that what the Vision 2063 strategy is and the actual policies on the ground are speaking to each other? Because right now, as an external investor in Malawi, in the agri space, it is tough. It is hard. A lot more communication, a lot more collaboration between government, private sectors, and even the Chamber of Commerce, and making a conducive environment. But more importantly, we do have some very good policies, but are they implemented? Are they monitored? And how are we going to facilitate that conversation?
Now, in other business news, countries across the globe are moving towards what they call digitization of their economies. Malawi seems not to lag behind, as strides have been made towards ensuring that we move to a paperless society. One of the key things is to bring a number of people in the equation to ensure that no one is left out of the equation. We caught up with Bram Fuduran, who is an ICT expert and ICTAM president, to find out his view of the status quo.
There's a lot of conversation around harmonizing the government systems. I know the Presidential Delivery Unit is going into a lab next week for 2 weeks with a number of MDAs. And I think the conversation is the same thing on how can we harmonize the public data to make sure that not everyone is just in the silos and doing their own stuff. So that's a good direction. What we need to do is, I think we need a consolidated voice from the private sector to be able to guide government and give support, because when you look at the private sector has been able to actually achieve the issue of data consolidation and sharing harmonized it. So how can we lend this, give this lesson to the government and help them to digitize and harmonize the data so they can achieve and accomplish problems that they are having from AIP point of view, the health sector, education. So I think this is a space that we're seeing a lot of movement, but I do hope and believe that the Presidential Delivery Unit, the lab that they are conducting next week, is going to be very critical, which we're also part of.
Well, that interview also brings us to the end of today's edition of the program Business Time, a magazine program where we bring you major business and economic news stories that make headlines in the country. On behalf of the entire production team, my name is William Kumwembe. Stay safe and always remember, if it doesn't make money, then it doesn't make sense. Bye for now.